really, if you're concerned to reduce intimate partner violence, you should be on the side of establishing presumptions of equal shared parenting. And this represents the decline in intimate partner violence. It's incredibly dramatic. And as you said, it was, I think, around 47% was the decline. Marriages can end, but divorce is forever. If you have children, there will be graduations, there will be marriages of the children, there will be births of grandchildren, and you are still linked together in this way. And so the idea that having an adversarial system is the way to handle marital dissolution is just crazy to me.
Welcome to Perspectives on Men. Today I'm talking with Don Hubin of the National Parents Organization in the U.S. Hi, Don. It's a pleasure to have you on the show.
Hi, Warren. Thanks for inviting me.
Great. Well, I think we can jump right into the topic. Today, as before, we're talking about shared parenting. And I thought we would go in a rough structure geographically by starting with talking about the United States and what's happening in some of the states that have passed laws regarding shared parenting. Then we can go over to Spain and look at the legislation that has passed in some of their regions and the effects on family situations there. And then finally, at the end, we can talk about Canada and the initiative that we have planned here regarding our own laws.
That sounds great, Warren.
Okay. So I think first, maybe we can start by doing an overview of the various states in the U.S. That have passed laws related to shared parenting. As I'm aware, there's about a half dozen of them. We had Kentucky in 2018, Arkansas in 2021, Florida in 2023, Missouri in 2023, West Virginia, I think was 2022. Laws that have been passed, as well as a little bit of time that has passed since those laws, where we're starting to see some effects on things like intimate partner violence, child maltreatment, and divorce rates. So why don't we start with the data that you're aware of on these states? You can start with whichever one you prefer and give our audience an overview of what the law entails, kind of what the effects it has on things like custody following divorce, and then what have been the effects on families in those states.
Great, Warren. So just by way of background, it's important to remind people who can get frustrated with the slow pace of change here that we have made progress. National Parents Organization has done a shared parenting report card 3 times now, first in 2014, then in 2019, and then in 2025. In 2014, no states were given grades in the A range. In 2019, I think we had 2 states in the A range. Arizona, you didn't mention Arizona. Arizona doesn't have an explicit equal shared parenting presumption, but it does have a strong shared parenting law as the result of efforts of primarily William Fabricius, the psychologist at Arizona State University, who's also been a champion of legislative reform here. So we had 2 states in 2019, and now we have the 5 states you mentioned that have explicit presumptions, and then Arizona as well. So there has been progress, and we typically have between 20 and 25, sometimes more than that, states that are considering strong shared parenting laws, and in a number of states we've gotten pretty far through the legislative process. In a couple of states we've missed a floor vote by 1 vote. And we now think in the next session we'll be able to get some other states joining the shared parenting. I just wanted to mention that by way of background. But as you say, we do have now a track record with legal presumptions of equal shared parenting. And we can start to look at some of the data and see what it shows. And one of the things that's of most interest to me, for a variety of reasons, but is the effect it might have on family violence. And by family violence, I mean both intimate partner violence and child maltreatment, because opponents of presumptions of equal shared parenting often raise the specter of this leaving children and spouses vulnerable to abusive ex-spouses. And they engage in a very rhetorically effective strategy of describing a terrible example where a parent has abused the children horribly after divorce, or abused the former spouse after the divorce. And then they go from that to saying, and therefore we can't have a presumption of shared parenting. Now, the argument doesn't really make much sense because, as you know, most courts will award a non-custodial parent every other weekend and one evening a week as a sort of minimum. Sometimes that's a rule they have. Sometimes it's just a practice that they have. And if a parent is a danger to the child or the other parent, then every other weekend, one evening a week, half the holidays, that's plenty of time for them to be abusive. So if there's a problem identifying people who are abusive, we should work on that problem, make sure that we are protecting people from abusive former partners. But the presumption of equal shared parenting is for cases where courts have determined that both parents are safe parents. And if we look at the data that we have here, it suggests quite a different story from this sort of fearful story that is told by opponents here. So some of the data we have comes from looking at Kentucky and Ohio. I don't know if I can share my screen with you. Is that?
Sure, let's try it. Try and click the share button, and if it doesn't work, I'll make sure to fix it.
So let me start actually with child maltreatment. And let's see if this works here. Are you seeing my screen?
Yes, okay. I can see it. Yeah.
So these data come from Health and Human Services in the U.S. They're Administration for Children and Families, and we looked at data about the number of children receiving an investigation or alternate response. The alternative response might be, Children's Protective Services looking into it or something like that. Between 2018, when Kentucky passed its presumption of equal shared parenting, and 2022, which was the last data that we had available when we did this. And you can see that in Ohio, which is the red line here, there's been a slight decrease in the number of cases where they've done an investigation. But in Kentucky, there was a dramatic decrease. And the decrease, well, here, the percent decrease in Ohio was just under 7%. In Kentucky, it was more than 37%. And if we look at the cases of the number of child victims in the two states, we see an even more dramatic story. Again, Ohio looks fairly flat here. Kentucky is dropping rather remarkably. In Ohio, the number of child victims went down by almost 11%, which sounds very good until you compare it with Kentucky's statistics, where it went down by close to 50%. That's rather dramatic. Now, we don't know why it is that there's this difference in child maltreatment. We're left to speculate on this, I think, right now. But what we think is it could be the result of the fact that shared parenting relieves some of the pressure that a parent might have if they have sole custody all the time. Anyone who's raised kids know that in addition to there being a joy, they can also be a bit of a trial. And the flip side of being marginalized in your children's life is often being overburdened. And so it could be that custodial parents feel overburdened and they might lash out at the children. Another possibility is that because both parents are fully involved with the children, if there is any indication of maltreatment, it gets nipped in the bud. It gets handled before it gets severe. I don't know, but these are pretty dramatic statistics that we have coming out of the comparison of Kentucky and Ohio. Within Ohio, which does not have a presumption of equal shared parenting, we have more data on child maltreatment and presumptions of shared parenting. I just said Ohio doesn't have a statewide presumption of equal shared parenting, but there is a state law that requires each county to have a local parenting time rule. And what NPO did was to grade the counties on their parenting time rules, giving A's to counties that had a presumption of equal parenting time, grades in the D range for those counties that have every other weekend and one evening a week. And then we took data from Health and Human Services that's very nicely provided to us in a county by county basis by the Annie E. Casey Foundation, and we correlated the counties that had presumptions of equal parenting time with the rate of child maltreatment there. And what you'll see here is the green line is the line that represents the rate of child maltreatment in the counties that had every other weekend and one evening a week schedules. The blue line is the statewide average, and the red line here is the incidences of child maltreatment in the counties that have presumptions of equal shared parenting. So that's more rather dramatic evidence about the relationship between presumptions of equal shared parenting and child maltreatment.
So just to give a little context for the audience, when you say child maltreatment, which data are you referring to? Is this police reports of abuse or something else?
Police are required to report these instances up to Health and Human Services, and I don't know exactly what the channel is, but they have data both on the number of reports that are made and the number of verified child victims. And when I compared Kentucky and Ohio, the first one had to do with reports that were made and how many investigations that were launched. The second one had to do with ones where they actually had identified victims of child maltreatment. But it's a reporting requirement in the U.S. Up to Health and Human Services.
Okay, so the first finding we have from Kentucky and Ohio is that in the regions where shared parenting laws were passed, there's a decrease in the rate of child maltreatment.
Yes,
but relative to the baseline.
Yeah, relative to the baseline and relative to other regions that didn't have it. That's correct. And by child maltreatment, we mean both child abuse and child neglect. So if a child is just sort of left on their own, so that counts as child maltreatment as well.
Okay.
So the other part of family violence has to do with intimate partner violence. And again, we get the charge that presumptions of shared parenting are a danger to potential victims of intimate partner violence. And what I'm going to share my screen again here. Back in 2023, I think it was, we have some updated data, but I don't have it on a graph to show you right now. It's also good. But back in 2023, Emma Johnson of Moms for Shared Parenting asked the Kentucky Administrative Office of the Courts to send data on cases that were cross-listed in family court and domestic violence cases. So in what number of cases was there a divorce, child custody case, and also a domestic relations case? And you can see these data go way back to 2010, and you can see it was dropping quite dramatically all along, which is very good news, of course. But if you look at it from 2018, which is right here, down to 2022, that it dropped by more than half in Kentucky. So that's further evidence of the relationship between instances of domestic violence and presumptions of shared parenting.
Mm-hmm. Now, one of the connections that I have heard alleged by some people is that, giving more parenting time to, let's say, the father after divorce exposes the children to danger, and it gives power to fathers and it takes power away from mothers. And there's this kind of language around fairness and justice and power. And what are your thoughts from NPO on, what is fair for children and what is fair for parents when there is a separation, and the relationship to potential violence?
So I always describe National Parents Organization as being child-focused and research-based. And that what I mean by that is that we ground our advocacy for shared parenting on what's in the best interest of the child based on the best research we have about child well-being. And all this talk about power between the fathers and the mothers sort of takes the focus off what's best for children. And we have now more than 40 years of research that speaks as univocally as social science research ever does to the conclusion that presumptions of equal shared parenting are beneficial to children in the vast majority of cases. There was just, Linda Nielsen. Some people may be familiar with her research over the years, where she does meta studies of primary research that's been done. Just last year, there was another paper published by Laura Vowles and her colleagues that was also a meta study of this. Terrific study that looks at the benefits to children. And again, it finds that children who are raised by separated parents in shared parenting arrangements do almost as well as children in sole custody, in intact marriages, and they do much better than children in sole custody arrangements. And so we have lots of research that this is what's in the best interest of children. I don't understand the argument that a parent is safe to have the children every other weekend, one evening a week, and half the holidays, but not safe to have the children 50% of the time. That doesn't make sense to me. And so again, I just want to say what I said before, that if there's a problem identifying parents who are a risk to the children, then we should be focusing our attention on that and not depriving the parents who are good and loving and safe parents from a presumption of equal time with their children.
Exactly. So I think what you're saying is we need to separate the issues of parenting safety from parenting time. And in the cases where there is strong evidence that one parent is not safe to be with the children because there's evidence of clear abuse or neglect, in those cases, that parent should not have any time with the children until that can be resolved. But in cases, let's call it the normal or common scenario where a couple breaks up, there's no history of violence or neglect or abuse, then the default should be equal shared parenting or 50-50 approximately. And that's why many of the times we call it a rebuttable presumption. So it's not enforcing a rigid structure of parenting time and responsibility on the couple, but it's using that as the starting point, and then they can argue for something different by presenting evidence. Is that right?
Absolutely, Warren. And the other thing I want to point out is that there are people who think that presumption of shared parenting is somehow going to increase the conflict between the parents. And in fact, it decreases the conflict between the parents. The presumption, whether it's probably not a de jure presumption anywhere, but the de facto presumption of sole custody, unless both parents agree to a different plan, is actually a cause of conflict between the parents. This is something that your fellow Canadian Edward Crook points out in his book, the equal parenting presumption. Is that, I was just looking up? Yeah, the equal parenting presumption. That there's plenty of research that shows that some of the conflict and unfortunately some of the violence that results is from a parent experiencing the sort of terror they have of losing their relationship with their child and being angry about that. So presuming sole custody is not part of the solution. It's really part of the problem. If you can assure both parents from the outset that if they're good and loving parents, and if their living arrangement works, I mean, they have to be living close enough together for this to work and so forth. But if that works and they're both safe parents, that they're going to be equally involved in their children's life, it turns down the temperature. And we've done polling now in 26 states in Ohio, and we're just getting ready to do polling in 4 more additional states, and one we're repolling again on issues concerning shared parenting. And one of the questions we ask is, when there's conflict between divorcing parents, do you think a presumption of sole custody contributes to that conflict or reduces the conflict or has no effect on it? And the overwhelming majority, I mean, over 80% say no, that it's this presumption of sole custody that actually increases the conflict between parents. So, I mean, I sometimes want to say to judges and attorneys who say, "Oh, these parents, they're fighting, they're locked in this battle with one another." I want to say to them, I don't mean you personally, whoever I might be talking to, but you, the system, you created the Hunger Games, and then you complain that they're fighting. I mean, you said, here's this, you have to fight to see who's the better parent here, and then you complain that they fight. Well, of course they're going to fight over that. So reassure them they'll both stay equally involved in their kids' lives, and you turn down the violence, and turn down the conflict, which sometimes leads to violence.
Right. Yeah. No, that's a very good summary. I think you captured the essence of the argument well. Now, there's a third effect. I wonder, there's maybe not quite as much data, but maybe you can say a word quickly on it, which is divorce rates. I think there was a Wall Street Journal article about the sharp fall in the divorce rate in Kentucky following this equal shared parenting law. So we've talked about so far the effects on children, lower violence rates towards children, lower intimate partner violence rates with the spouses. And then the divorce rate seems to be falling as well. Do you think this is related to that law, or is it just a correlation?
I think it's possible. I think the data is pretty preliminary right now, and I've seen some pushback about the Wall Street Journal article from serious researchers who say, there's not that much of a decline, and it's not. So I'm not positive of that effect. There's some reason to believe that it would reduce the divorce rate. There's an old paper by an economist with a memorable title, "These Boots Are Made for Walking." And it's, why most divorces are initiated by women. That's something that people sometimes don't realize, that this has been consistently true over decades, that about 2/3 of divorces are initiated by women. And one of the things they argue is that, when a woman can be pretty confident that she'll keep custody of the children and she'll get child support and sometimes spousal support and so forth, it can seem like the exit strategy can look more attractive. And we actually have maybe some anecdotal evidence. There's a judge in Kentucky, Judge Michael Wood Pence, who has been a family law judge for I think about 10 years now or so. No, maybe it was 2018. I think she came on, actually. She said, where she said that sometimes now women will say, well, if I've got to really cooperate with him anyway, maybe I should work on making the marriage work. So there's some reason to believe it might have that sort of reduction. If it does, that's good. The first thing is for people to try to work things out if they can, if they have children. But I'm not positive that those data are going to hold up for us in the long run.
Right.
One thing I should say, though, is it's very clear that it reduces the conflict. It reduces the contentiousness of the divorce. And we have evidence of that from Kentucky. It's easier to resolve a divorce with children case in Kentucky than it is in Ohio. We have lawyers who practice in both states, and they say that. Michael Wood Pence, the judge that I just mentioned, said that she finds it much easier to resolve these cases as well. So whether it reduces the actual divorce rate, I'm not positive of that yet, but it does reduce the contested divorce rate. It allows parents to work out an arrangement. And we also have evidence for that from Spain as well. I know you want to talk about that as well.
Sure. And the other states, just to wrap up on the U.S., Florida, Missouri, West Virginia, these ones, I think the laws were only passed, less than 2 years ago, approximately. So it might take some time before we really see the effects of that. So maybe we can do a follow-up in a couple of years and see if there's data coming out of those states, and then we'll have more of a cluster across the whole U.S.
Absolutely. And we are gathering those data as they become available. But as you say, we don't, there's some lag in getting the data. And of course, there's going to be a little bit of lag in the effect being caused. So it's going to take a few more years before we have reliable data, especially from Missouri and Florida that just passed it in 2023.
Right. Okay. Well, we will wait for that. And while we're waiting, let's talk about the Spanish research paper that was published, I believe, in 2024 by Daniel Fernandez-Kranz, Natalia Nullenberger, Jennifer Roth, and it's called Bargaining Under Threats, the Effect of Joint Custody Laws on Intimate Partner Violence. So if I can summarize what this is about, I think you understand the paper much better than I do, but basically what they did is they looked at regions of Spain where between 2009 and 2011, 5 regions passed shared parenting laws of some variety, and they found that overall intimate partner violence decreased by about 40 to 50% in the regions of Spain where these laws entered into effect. Is that right?
That's correct. Yes.
Okay. So why don't you unpack this paper a little bit for us? Kind of what was their method, what were the effects, and what were the kind of causal links in that?
So this is a really terrific paper by 3 economists. They're very careful in their methodology, And they recognized that Spain provided something that's very rare in social sciences. It provided what's called a natural experiment. You know, if you're a chemist in the lab, you can line up 10 test tubes that have the same thing in each of them, and then you treat each of them differently and see what happens. Unfortunately, it's very hard in the social sciences to do those kinds of controlled experiments. But a natural experiment is when nature sort of gives you something like a controlled experiment. So what they did was to look at these 5 regions of Spain that right around 2010, as you mentioned, had adopted presumptions of shared physical custody. And the first thing they did was to ensure that these 5 regions of Spain weren't all the same in other respects. So some of them were more industrialized, some of them were politically conservative, some were politically liberal. They had a variation between the 5 of them. And taken as a whole, the variation that they showed was similar to the variation of the other regions of Spain. So they were here that what they were doing was verifying that, to take the chemist example again, what was in the test tubes to start with was pretty much the same stuff, you know.
Yeah.
Then they looked at the intimate partner violence rate in the 5 regions that adopted the presumptions of shared parenting and compared it with the regions that didn't. And I'll share my screen another time to show you the graph, because for me, the graphs are always more impactful than just the statements. So this shows in 2010 here, that's when these regions, 2009 to 2011, they adopted these presumptions. The red line represents what they call in research speak here the control regions, the regions that didn't adopt presumptions of shared parenting. And the treated regions, those are the regions that did, are represented by the blue line. And this represents the decline in intimate partner violence. It's incredibly dramatic. And as you said, it was, I think, around 47% was the decline that they found, and that's remarkable. And they were quite explicit in how they described it. I think I have a quote here from them. They said that the presumption of shared physical custody, and this is a quote, led to a large and significant decrease in intimate partner violence, with the largest effects among couples where the mother was more likely to seek sole custody before the policy change. And they said the policy significantly decreased domestic violence, with intimate partner violence dropping by almost 50%. And they found a significant reduction in the number of female homicides committed by intimate partners after the custody reform. So this is the best it gets in social science, to have a natural experiment like this. I mean, when you compare Kentucky and Ohio, people would say, yeah, they're neighboring states, but there are differences between them. Ohio's more industrialized than Kentucky and so forth. But these regions are very similar, the regions that adopted it overall to the regions that didn't, and they found this dramatic decline in intimate partner violence. So really, if you're concerned to reduce intimate partner violence, you should be on the side of establishing presumptions of equal shared parenting.
That's wonderful. And it's interesting to contrast with the United States, because obviously Spain is in a different continent. They have a different culture and history to the United States. And with similar laws, we're seeing very comparable effects to the United States. So that really shows us, at least in these 2 cases, that there is a pretty strong cause and effect relationship between the laws and what's happening with violence. And it's a positive, from a social perspective, effect that we would like to see replicated in other parts of the world.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. So we will link that research paper in the description of this video for the audience. And I want to go now to turn to the future, which is Canada. In contrast to the United States, we have the Divorce Act, which is federal law. It governs the entire country regarding what happens after divorce, especially with custody. In the US, you can do all these small little state level experiments. So with our law, the Canadian Centre for Men and Families is partnering with a few other organizations to propose a bill in the House of Commons to have a rebuttable presumption of equal shared parenting. This will be in the near future coming. And what we are doing currently is we have a petition where ordinary Canadians can log in and put their names behind this in support of this bill. So I will link to the petition as well. But basically, what we would like to do is similar to what's happened in Kentucky and other states by having a rebuttable presumption for the entire country of Canada. This has been attempted a couple times before in previous years, but it didn't pass. It depends obviously on the political realities, the distribution of seats between the different parties. So in the case of Canada, it'll be the opposition party's shadow minister for justice that will be putting this forward. Mm-hmm. And there is a wide coalition of groups that support this proposed legislation. So I want to turn back to you and get your thoughts or feelings on what Canadians need to know, especially the ones who are either not educated on the topic, they're not familiar with shared parenting, or they might believe some of the myths. They might believe that the current status quo is in the best interests of the child, the laws we have on the books right now. Why is it that we need to do this change? And how can we kind of mitigate their fears about what might happen and also encourage them to consider the benefits here in Canada?
Great, Warren. So we have found that we are pretty predictably opposed by three groups when we propose presumptions of equal shared parenting. Judges tend to oppose it. The Bar Association tends to oppose it. And domestic violence groups oppose it. Now, we've talked already about the domestic violence groups. I think it's very important to provide the research on this and to press legislators to pay attention to the research on this and not simply to be swayed by a horrible story, because you can find horrible stories in any situation. Anecdotes don't prove anything there. But so I won't talk more about the domestic violence stuff, but I think it's very important to have to provide legislators and to provide the media, if the media is covering this and so forth, with the data on this so that they can be apprised of that. Let me say something about the other two groups that oppose it. Judges oppose it. What they say is that every case is different. There shouldn't be a presumption. Let us do what's in the best interest of the children in any particular case. And some judges are doing a fine job. And one thing I always remind people of is this is a terribly difficult job to do. I mean, you're making incredibly impactful decisions on people's lives, and often with a very heavy caseload and so forth. So I'm not a judge basher, but having a presumption of shared parenting reduces the conflict between the parents and makes it easier to resolve cases, and it allows the court then to spend more time focusing on those cases that are really difficult and require more judicial interference. And I mentioned earlier Judge Michael Wood Pence in Kentucky. She has several videos where I just was testifying at the same hearing with her for a bill in Oklahoma, and she has said when this bill in Kentucky was first introduced, I was opposed to it. I thought this was going to be a bad thing, but she loves it now. She says it's easier to resolve cases and so forth. So in responding to the judges, I think it's important for them to hear judges who have experience with this, because, I've heard it said that no one likes change except a baby. And of course, the court system, they think they're doing a pretty good job, and they don't want to be changed. They certainly don't want the outside changing them in some way. But if you can present the experiences of judges who have actually practiced under this presumption, I think that can be very powerful. And William Fabricius in Arizona has said that he would be happy. He extended this to people in the States, but I'm sure he would be happy to do it with people in Canada as well. He would be happy to connect people with their peers in Arizona. So judges with judges, lawyers with lawyers, legislators with legislators, to have them talk about Arizona's experience with its shared parenting law. So I think that's another powerful tool you can use. And when judges raise questions and concerns about this, you should say, well, let's look at what's actually happening in the states where they've done this. And then with respect to the Bar Association, here's a case where I think judges' interests and attorneys' interests can come apart because judges like to have cases that aren't contested and don't go on with long trials. But attorneys, of course, that's how they make their money, you know. And I think with attorneys, one of the things you have to do is to remind people that attorneys are experts in family law. That doesn't make them experts in child well-being. Doesn't make them expert in sociology and psychology and so forth, right? And so the idea that because we're experts in family law, we know what's best for children, that's a mistake. That's a myth. You know, you didn't study child well-being when you were in law school. You talked about the myths that people have. We have on our website, and we're happy to share this as widely as possible, a list of myths and facts about shared parenting. This is under the tab on our website called Resources. And what it does is to state the myths, and then it summarizes the research rebutting the myths there. And it gives the actual citations to the research so people can dig that out. So I think that's important in rebutting these myths we talked about. But there's another myth that interestingly holds back presumptions of shared parenting here. And that is, there are a lot of people who think, isn't that what everyone does anyway? People who don't have any direct contact with the family law system or don't have a family member who's gone through this, or people who went through it and they did it in an amicable way, you know, they think, oh yeah, that's people do shared parenting. What's the problem, you know? But in fact, it only takes one parent to object to it to prevent it from happening, right? And if that one parent objects to it, they're often successful in courts, because often the courts say, well, if the parents can't agree to do shared parenting, then they certainly can't operate under a shared parenting agreement. Now, that's false. We have plenty of evidence that that's false. We have plenty of evidence. We have anecdotal evidence of people who say this, but we have research that shows that presumptions of shared parenting work even when it's not the case that both parents agreed to it initially. But one of the things that holds us back is sometimes people see a Hollywood portrayal of this, you know, very civilized, divorced couple that still cooperate really closely in raising their children, and think, well, that's sort of the way it's done. But that's a rarity, actually, and so that's why you need the presumption of equal shared parenting. So that's yet another myth. But I would direct people to look at the myths and facts about shared parenting. We have it on family violence and child maltreatment, but also on other things about shared parenting, like does shared parenting wind up causing more contentious divorces and cost couples more? Because lawyers will often say, oh, if you have this presumption, it's going to increase litigation and families are going to spend more money. I always wonder, of course, if lawyers are the best people to be telling us how families should cut their divorce expenses.
Right. Well, you always have to look at the incentives, right? When you're charging by the hour, reducing the number of hours is not in your interest. That's a pretty simple math, right? So I've thought about, would it ever be conceivable that we would have a flat rate to handle a divorce case instead of a hourly rate? You know, I think doing so would motivate lawyers to resolve the case as quickly as possible so that they could get on to the next one, instead of dragging it out for hundreds of hours with hundreds of thousands of dollars in fees.
I think it would. That would be very interesting. I was sitting next to a woman once at a conference. Judges were giving this conference here, and I was chatting with the woman, and she said, "Yeah, I kept getting this bill from my attorney, and it said BS $10, BS $10, BS 10." And she said, "Well, what?" She thought, here's what BS could mean, but that wasn't what it was. She finally asked, well, what is this BS that I'm getting charged $10 for all the time? It says, oh, well, that's when my secretary calls you and gets a busy signal.
Yeah.
So $10 every time they try to call and get a busy signal. So, I mean, the charging by the hour, it's the wrong incentive for this. There are some attorneys that are doing a kind of concierge approach. So they're not representing you, but they'll help you prepare your briefs, and they'll charge you a certain amount to prepare the brief and make sure that it's following the correct form and so forth. The other change in legal practice here that's very interesting to me is what's called collaborative law, and I don't know whether you have this in Canada or not, but the collaborative law begins by, both parents have an attorney representing them, and there's a code of conduct of honesty and openness and not playing games and all this stuff. You might say, okay, that's just words, that people commit themselves to doing that. But what gives the collaborative law model some bite is this: if the parties can't work things out on their own and submit an agreed judgment entry to the court for the court to approve, neither of those attorneys can represent the parents in the contested custody case or any contest about the divorce. So each attorney has an incentive to come to an agreement. It's not in their interest to fan the flames.
Yeah. I don't know if that's been practiced in Canada, but it is an interesting idea. Yeah. So I think what you've said and what I said earlier, we need to think differently about the incentives in the family law system. If people are incentivized to prolong the divorce, increase the level of conflict, and charge as many fees as possible, they will do that. If they are paid more for resolving a case quickly and peacefully, then that's what they will fight to do, to have that outcome. Another issue with the legal profession is they often see things in terms of winning or losing. So if a client comes to the law firm and says, I want control of my children, then the lawyer will fight as hard as possible to win the case on behalf of the client, even though by doing so, that may not actually be in the children's best interest psychologically, developmentally. So we need to kind of zoom out a little bit and say, instead of winning or losing between the two parents, what we really should be doing is looking at the effects on the entire family post-divorce in the years and decades to follow.
Yeah. So I've often said that if some alien anthropologist, if E.T., maybe that's a reference that people don't know anymore, but if E.T. were an anthropologist and came down to Earth and studied how we handle marital dissolution when there are children, I think they'd conclude that it was designed by a sadist. I mean, the idea of putting it in the first instance, into a legal system which is grounded in disputation, and where each attorney is required to give zealous representation for their client's interests as the client, claims them to be. That's a crazy way to handle marital dissolution, because it may be a fine way, if there's a corporate breakup, or if Apple is suing Google or something like that, it may be fine to do that. But with families, there is a legal aspect to it. Of course, the court has to say the marriage is ended and so forth. But if you have children, as some wise person once said, marriages can end, but divorce is forever. If you have children, there will be graduations, there will be marriages of the children, there will be births of grandchildren, and you are still linked together in this way. And so the idea that having an adversarial system is the way to handle marital dissolution is just crazy to me. If I were designing things from scratch, I would say if two people who are married or have been living together for a while and have children, they want to end that relationship, they first go to counseling. And the counselor says, can you work this out? What are the problems? And if they don't do that, if they really have to separate, then you do the mediation. What is it you really care about? What does this person cares about? And you try to resolve as much as you can before you get into the adversarial system with lawyers zealously representing their clients.
Right. No, I think that's right. We need to try everything before you go to that high conflict situation. And I think we also need to speak, besides the lawyers and the judges, we need to speak to parents directly themselves.
Yes.
And send this message that, okay, we understand you may fall out of love with your ex-spouse. You might even hate that person. You might never want to see them again. That's part of the reality of romance and marriage. It does happen to a certain number of people. But don't use that as an excuse to punish the children for your negative emotion towards your ex-spouse. Leave the children out of your feelings towards that person and do what is really best for them. Keep their lives happy, keep them growing in a healthy way. And as we reviewed today, all the data shows that that's, absent any violence or neglect in a normal situation, that is through shared parenting. That is what is really proven to be in the best interest of the children. So in the extreme case, you have parental alienation, which is another topic, but I think it's related because it's unfortunately punishing the children because of spite of the ex-spouse, right? And what we really need to do is say, okay, have your feelings towards this person, but don't harm the kids. Keep them out of it. Give them access to the other parent. Allow them to grow up with both parents, whether it's mother and father or same sex in either case. Children need relationships with both parents, and that's really what helps them grow up into healthy adults. So we need to separate again those issues, and there's emotional and psychological work I think that parents need to do on themselves. I would encourage them, besides the couples therapy, to try and work out their issues, is to do individual therapy, do their own counseling or whatever it happens to be, whatever works for you. Work on yourself, manage your own emotions so that you are not harming your children as a result of the marriage breakdown.
Yeah, I'm glad you raised the educating parents about this as well, because sometimes people are so focused on making legislative changes or changing court practices or court behaviors. But of course, if parents really understood the value of shared parenting, I think you'd have a lot more shared parenting going on. There would be people who would really try to overcome these negative emotions. I mean, when couples are separating, there's always bad feelings, at least on one person's part. I mean, there can be fear, there can be humiliation, there can be embarrassment, there can be anger and all these emotions. But if people really appreciated what's best for kids, they should try as much as possible to put those emotions aside. One of the things I've found really interesting is in this polling that we've done on attitudes towards shared parenting, we find that legal presumptions of shared parenting are endorsed overwhelmingly, like more than 80% of people. In some states, more than 90% of people support it. And I was talking with William Fabricius that I mentioned earlier here, and he said, what I don't understand is if that's true, and we found that it cuts across demographic divides like race, ethnicity, political affiliations, but also cuts across sex. So men and women both support this. He said, but I don't understand, if men and women both support this, why isn't everyone doing shared parenting? And I said, I think what's going on here is what some people call the me exception. There are people who approve of something in general, but they make an exception for themselves. So yes, shared parenting is best. Almost everyone should do it, but not me with my ex, because I'm angry at my ex, or something like that. So people do have to, as you say, work through these emotions and really put the children first, and that usually means supporting shared parenting, even if the other parent doesn't do everything the way you want them to do it.
Right. No, that's very well said. And similar data exists in Canada. The latest was, I believe, 2022 Nanos poll in Canada of Canadians. And this is representative of different age groups, men and women, different ethnicities, religions, political affiliations. So it's really a cross-section of all of Canadian society. Found that 77% of Canadians would support a presumption of equal shared parenting after divorce. And 89% feel that it's in the best interest of the child. So on both sides of the border, there really is a strong majority supporting this issue. I think the barrier or the sticking point that has prevented us thus far from passing the laws is it tends to be not an issue that's on the high priorities for politicians. It's not something that really wins elections. Typically, it's other issues like the economy where they focus most of their attention. However, the long-term effects of shared parenting versus sole parenting are quite significant on people's lives. So I think we need to raise this in profile a little bit and remind our political class and the judicial and legal class that this is really what Canadians and Americans want. This is, if you're going for a democratic law that represents, the majority of the population, this is the thing you should support.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep.
Yeah. Well, I think we covered all the main topics for today, Don. So I want to thank you very much for generously giving your time on this Halloween Friday and sharing all the latest and greatest research that we have from Spain and the US. And I hope we can talk again sometime. So have a wonderful afternoon and thanks for joining.
Terrific, Warren. And please put the link to NPO's website in the file as well, so that people can get there if they want to look at the research. We have a lot of research that we freely distribute to people. So, okay.
Wonderful. We will include that link. Okay.
Great, Warren. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.